Welcome back to my channel and to another creative video. In today's video, I've got the process of working through a Valentine or heart theme spread. While I'm not a huge fan of Valentine's Day, I love a good theme. So right now, I've got a bunch of fun heart and love themed artwork and handmade junk journals in the shop, as well as a couple of small instant access classes revolving around the theme of hearts and Valentine's Day. I love a good theme and I love working in a lot of different ways within that theme, whether it's a season or a holiday. I love challenging myself to see how far I can go within that theme. And again, while I'm not a big fan of actual Valentine's Day, I do love using a heart and playing around with the symbolism and motif of hearts year round in my art journaling or in my artwork. You'll often see a lot of hearts and different heart motifs appear in many of the different things that I create. And today I thought it'd be fun to share with you the process of creating a heart themed page that really could be utilized any time of the year. I wanted to make use of some kind of a fold or a flap for one of my surfaces and have that be quite a bit of a focal point. And so I'm using a piece of watercolor paper that I will glue to my page, but I wanted to rip it down the center so it felt like it was maybe a little bit of a broken heart. I'm going to be utilizing both the outside and inside of this space for more creativity. I really love using flaps, pockets, and attaching different pieces of paper or scraps to the inside of my art journal that enables me to continue to add more surfaces for that creativity. This is great if you fill up your journal or you're running out of space. Adding a flap really enables you to grow space. They can fold out, they can fold open. It gives you some fun ways to play with additional surfaces to get creative on. I often do this if my art journal starts filling up and I may be running out of space, or if I want to cover things up or just add to a spread in a unique way. And so I thought it would be fun to have one side of my spread with my broken heart flap. And you'll see I've got a really basic heart on there, and I'm using a black stamp pad just to accentuate the rip down the middle. This is going to get altered quite a bit. I'm even going to add a little tie to it eventually so it stays closed. But this is a fun way to continue to add more space and to have a good excuse to have space underneath. So you can open it up and really play around with opening something up to a new surface or a new excuse to continue to keep creating. My art journaling style is definitely more of a maximalist. I love seeing how much I can fit on a surface. I often talk about this a lot in my different classes as well as here on my channel. I love mashing up different patterns, different approaches, and so I love having a good excuse to play around with different things on different surfaces. A flap is something you can close up or open up or have little bits, pieces, corners, new space to work on is a fun way to mash up different mediums, different styles. And so the inside of this particular fold out flap, I wanted to play around with a little bit of a pretty simple floral design and pattern, and then give myself some space in the middle where I could add a quote. I wanted something to open up where we've got writing on the inside and some really pretty red floral pattern. Because I am working with the theme of hearts and a little bit of that traditional Valentine's Day, I'm going to be using a lot of reds and pinks. I just love playing around with that theme and seeing how far I can take it in a way that's not so traditional. And I'm going to be mashing up a lot of different patterns and imagery on this surface as well as free writing. Again, I like to load on all of the different things in my art journal. It's my place to play and experiment. I don't get too concerned with anything needing to look perfect or working through things in a traditional composition. I really like just challenging myself to see how far I can take things on this surface. And again, because I have that fold open flap, it just gives me more room and space to play around. And one of my favorite ways to actually fill space is utilizing a really simple floral pattern. I'm using a lot of brushwork to do this, but you'll notice I'm slipping in some hearts in between all of my vines and those flowers and leaves. I really like the way this looks. It's pretty simple and easy to do, but it registers as some very decorative pattern. And you can see opening it up, I've got this really great little surprise inside that I'm going to top off with the inside of it being painted black so I can go back in when I'm ready and work over the top of that black paint with a good quote in the middle. I like the idea of opening up that broken heart and having some kind of love inspired quote inside. Now I wanted to add a little tie to my flap because it's not going to be staying closed very well. And so I thought this would be another great excuse to just add another element, another mixed media element to this surface. So I've got a little bit of twine, red and white twine that I'm going to be adding to the two holes that I punched. And this just enables me to close it up in a fun way. Just continues to add those layers, adding another bit and piece of color and texture to that surface. Now I'm going to jump over to the other side of my spread and add a little bit of collage ephemera. I'm still working my way through a big box of trash, recycled bits and pieces from both the holidays, things that I hang on to. I'm a big believer in being really mindful about what I use in my artwork these days, and I try to make use of trash before I go out and buy anything new. So I've got all kinds of different upcycled papers, things that I can alter once I add them to my surface. And I'm using a lot of things that are red. I've got some fabric, some tissue paper, as well as wrapping paper. And you'll notice I'm just going over the top and kind of muting down some of that red. I don't want things to be too overpowering at this point. I want a really interesting background that has some textural elements. Also has some little bits and pieces of some of that pattern peeking through some of that white paint that I used over the top. Now, I wanted to add a little pocket to this page, and I have some leftover envelopes from a class that I taught earlier this year called Creative Correspondence, where we made handmade envelopes and cards, and I had the perfect tiny little envelope with red roses on it to add to my surface that I thought would be fun to add another heart inside of. But I'm going to be working around that tiny envelope at this point and use it as just another design element on that surface. When I add these types of elements, I will continue working over the top of things, painting in and around different elements, really working between covering some things up, but then leaving some things showing. I've set myself up with a big black circle that will eventually be turned into some decorative mandala designs, but I'm going to jump back over to the other side of my spread and give myself some lines that I can utilize for some free writing inside of all those lines. I do this all the time in my art journal. It's one of my favorite ways to add text as a design element. I love having different sizes of lines to write inside of, and I often pick different types of pens, different colors, different weights of those pens. I've got bold lettering or I've got fine, airy cursive. I love adding this in and around different elements, and so I didn't just want my big heart floating in the middle. I wanted to really utilize a lot of that space in and around it, and I love using my own handwriting as that design element and as a way to fill space. Often I will squish my handwriting in between different elements in nooks and crannies. It's a great way to combine your own memories or quotes, things that are maybe inspiring onto those pages, and really incorporate it into the other visual elements happening. Now I'm jumping back to the left-hand side of my spread, and I'm going to be using my white Uniball Signo, my favorite white pen to draw with, over the top of that big black circle. Now, one of the little tips that I utilize when I am working with this many layers and painting and then drawing over anything that's been painted is I really try to only use matte acrylic paint. It makes for a great surface to draw over the top of, especially if you're working with a white pen. So paints that have a gloss or are shiny often are really tricky to draw over the top of, but I have the best luck if I am using matte acrylic paint on the inside of my art journal pages. It often helps too from things sticking together once you close that journal up. And so my white Signo works really well. It flows really well over the top of that black matte acrylic paint. So I can have fun playing around with some of those mandala drawings that I like to incorporate into a lot of my art journal pages. This is kind of one of my favorite ways just to kick back and relax, have fun kind of doodling, playing around with the design, but also creating something that feels really detailed or embellished. I love combining really bold elements like my big red heart next to things that are very detailed or embellished. It's one of my favorite ways to mash up different elements and really play around with that push and pull between different look and feel of all the things happening on those pages. Now, as I am building lots of different elements on my spread, I really start to take inventory of what kind of colors or what kind of things I want to pull in. And this particular spread, I felt like I definitely wanted to grunge it up a little bit. I love a good drip and I love using the color black. So just because I'm working with a Valentine theme where I've got reds and pinks doesn't mean I'm going to go full Valentine theme. I love pulling in the color black, especially in combination with some of these colors. I love dripping paint. It's a great way to add another unique expressive element on a surface, and I often will do this along edges or at the top of things. It's going to pull together some of those other black elements that I have going on, specifically when I open up that flap and have my quote. I'm going back in and adding one of my favorite E. E. Cummings quotes. You are my sun, my moon, and all of my stars. I love utilizing lines from poetry, lyrics from songs, but I also really enjoy coming up with my own words, things that are memorable or meaningful depending on the type of motif or theme that I'm working in my art journal. I often will free write and even document my day or memories. Other times I like picking something really meaningful that can be more of a focal point and really echo the look, the feel, or the vibe that I have happening on an art journal page. I thought this would be a perfect place to add a quote so that when you open up that broken heart, you've got something really beautiful on the inside. It's a fun way to play with space, with your own handwriting, favorite quotes, and things that are meaningful. But I love the idea of then tying this back up and kind of having that as a surprise underneath that big bold heart. Now I wanted to add a few little stencils, so I used my heart punch, punched out a couple of hearts, and I'm just using a beauty sponge to then add that paint. It's a really easy way to create just a softer look and feel when using a stencil. And I just want to add little teeny tiny hearts kind of sprinkled in and around some of the areas of my spread. You'll notice that this particular spread has a lot of very different looking elements happening. I've got my bold red heart, I've got my very detailed mandala, I have my little envelope that we're going to work with pretty soon, and I've got some of those grungier elements with that dripped paint as well as all of that collage in the background. And it really starts to take on a completely different look and feel the more layers that I add to this type of surface. I couldn't resist adding another heart to that little pocket, that envelope pocket. I just cut it out of watercolor paper, painted it red with that acrylic paint, and then I'm using my white pen again to draw over the top of that heart. I wanted to add this little decorative heart to go inside of that envelope pocket. I love a little pocket on an art journal page. Again, it's another way to create more space. You can store things in it. You can create a fun little visual surprise, add stickers, add receipts, or anything meaningful, even add a photograph to pockets like this. I am notorious in my art journal for having many different spreads with large envelope pockets, little teeny tiny pockets hidden maybe in a corner here and there, and then over time slowly filling those pockets with lots of different ephemera and things that are meaningful. But I love the idea of having like a little Valentine stuck inside of this little envelope pocket, little surprise sitting there that doesn't take up a ton of that space. And at this point for me, my spread is done. And often there is an art to knowing when to stop. And for me, as an artist who spends a lot of time working with lots of different layers, I often ask myself, would I be sad or disappointed if I took things too far and covered covered things up. If at any point I'm liking a surface so much that I get a little bit nervous to continue to keep working, that is when I tend to call it quits. I'll always give myself permission to go back and revisit pages, try to decide if I want to work some more with layers, but I always love taking a pause and giving it time so I can just kind of let things rest and maybe return later on down the road. This was a fun spread to create, again, working within that heart and Valentine theme, and it's a fun way to play around with a variety of different materials and layers. You all enjoyed a little peek into my own process, and I hope you find a little bit of inspiration in this video.